And we're live. It is Tuesday, the 5th of August. It is the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. And I was wearing this dog shirt yesterday because my days actually begin after the show, which is when I take the dogs, have my morning meeting, 9:30, take the dogs to the park or on a walk, and then I get dressed. And so I am often wearing, maybe this is TMI, on the show, the dog shirt that I wore yesterday, because I kind of roll out of bed, put on a dog shirt. And so I just full disclosure, and I was wearing this dog shirt yesterday, and I took, if I do say so myself, a very cute picture of Cleo the dog sitting on my chest on the couch with me wearing this dog shirt. And I did what I always do when I have a good dog shirt picture, which is I text it to somebody who hates dog shirts. Usually, but not always, Quinta Jurecic, sometimes Peter Struck, but one of the true dog shirt haters. And this was not actually a picture of a dog shirt. It was just a picture that includes a dog shirt. It's a picture of Cleo the dog sitting on me in a kind of clumsy fashion. And Quinta texted back, "I hate your shirt," which I just want to say was very inappropriate. And I immediately told on her. I sent the exchange to Quinta's pro dog shirt spouse, the estimable Emily Hogue, who told me that in fact she once had a dress with a pattern very similar to this. So I want to say to the Jurassic Hogue household, I am unrepentant about this shirt, and you can deal with that as you will. Um, uh, so, Jeff points out in the chat that this shirt is begging for a tie-dye. And there is something to be said for that view, other than the fact that I have exactly no time to do a tie-dye. But I do think it goes well with the American flag background. And so, while I am waiting for the estimable Minna Ålander, who I believe is showing up this morning, which of course is afternoon to her, I have my American flag background, my dog shirt and lawfare mug, and this is an old style lawfare mug, which are both in black and white. So, look, the sun is kind of not shining today. It's actually kind of dank out, but it's cool. It's not blazing hot. The birds are definitely chirping, and this morning I heard one of my local mourning doves with a particularly pronounced, which was cool because I always like that. Um, it's going to be a great freaking day. And here is Minna Ålander, who is so far a black rectangle, but I think will materialize. She is sitting outside, um, only a little
Can you
bit.
see me now?
See you just fine, but
All right.
I'm
Can you hear me
hearing
as well?
myself. Yes,
Uh,
I hear you, but I'm hearing myself echoed back at me. So I'm going to keep you muted
yeah,
when you're not speaking. Um, Look, folks, it's going to be a great frickin' day, and uh, you're watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a goddamn revolution in morning television. And one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that sometimes the dog shirt and the old style lawfare mug match. They're both black and white against the background of the American flag, and they are both kind of outlines. And one of them, anyway, antagonizes Quinta Jurecic and gives aid and comfort to her wife. And another one of the revolutionary features is that Minna Ålander will appear from a chaise lounge somewhere in Sweden and is also kind of in almost black and white because the white is so um, radiant from the sun that she's like almost in outline. I don't quite know how to describe it. It's a very powerful look. Good morning or good afternoon, Minna.
good afternoon. I guess I should have like chosen a spot with like partial shade. I might like move a little if this seems untenable or like if my laptop starts showing signs of like going up in flames or something. It's not like super hot today, so I thought that I might just like be able to just sit in right in the sun, but let's see how good this is for the technology. You might see me moving around at some
Well,
point.
what
We'll see.
yeah, that's fine. What where are you?
I'm just sitting outside, like not far away from where I live, so we have a lot of nice sort of like spots here. So I got this kind of beach chair that I'm very mobile with, and I can always choose a spot. I actually like to work outside quite a lot. I My computer is very old, but the battery is still up and kicking, so I can actually write quite well just sitting outside. And then when like if I don't connect to the internet, like that also like isn't distracting me. So it sort of works. But if I'm sort of like
Yeah.
looking just like a black shadow on like a white background, I can definitely sort of move around to a more shady spot. Let me see
No,
what I
it's
can do. I
awesome.
think
It's
there's like a. All right.
no, 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 it's fine. Leave it be. Um, so what are you thinking about today?
I have been thinking about sort of first of all, like because I just today published my first sort of kickoff article as the defense editor of the European Correspondent, which I hope that you will all subscribe to. It's like a newsletter based
Yeah, so
Europe-wide media. I'm gonna send the
put
link in the
a
chat.
link.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
do that just in a minute. And so I started this new side hustle as the defense editor of the European Correspondent, which is an attempt at making journalism truly Europe-wide. So we have correspondents all over Europe, and we try to bring stories like not only on like sort of defense and geopolitics, but all kinds of things like culture, democracy, human rights, healthcare, economics, like all spheres of life. And we try to make it interesting for all Europeans, which is kind of an interesting challenge when you think about that. The like I don't know, 45-year-old teacher from Sevilla should like want to click on my article, just like also the I don't know, waste management operator from Sofia or something. So it's like it's an interesting challenge, and also because like obviously I'm not a journalist by background, so like sort of learning even more than just in Substack to communicate to a wider public. I mean, obviously Substack is still sort of like a niche thing. Like people who write my or read my stuff there are probably sort of like somewhat interested in the topics already, sort of like perhaps on the nerdy side in terms of like defense questions. So like sort of writing for a public or like an audience that is not necessarily sort of like intrinsically interested in this stuff, and sort of like I imagine my audience to be sort of like what I've called the habitual Western European pacifist, and like try to explain to them like why the developments in European security and defense are important, and why it's not only about some kind of an evil sort of like military industrial complex. It's quite an interesting challenge, to be honest, like sort of as opposed to like writing policy papers, which of course like where the target audience is like policymakers and politicians and so on, and governments.
Right,
So
and are
yeah,
much
this is
more apt
pretty
to
interesting.
already be where you need them to be.
Yeah, exactly. So I like as I said, like I'm gonna send the link just in a minute. I just can't multitask, so I'm gonna speak first and send the link then afterwards. But yeah, so for the first article, I wrote about sort of like where Europe stands, basically like 6 months after JD Vance came to the Munich Security Conference and basically declared a culture war in Europe. So what has Europe actually done with that time? Where like have we gotten anywhere? And actually, I mean, those who follow me and like have read my Substack know that I've kept an eye on the developments, and there's plenty of them. And actually, there's sort of like this regrettable perceptions versus reality situation that Europe has done a lot and gotten quite far in the last 6 months. But because of like part of this European strategy involves this kind of placating Trump and like giving him some wins, and sort of like, I don't know, accepting a certain sort of like humiliation in terms of stratcom. That's like all that European public see. So they don't necessarily pick up on the things that are being done. They just see sort of like what is being said and how the reporting on all of this is, and it doesn't look as good as it actually is on substance. So that's something that I've been
And also,
thinking
you
about
can't
quite a
brag
lot.
about the substance.
Yeah, it's much harder than like just having sort of like some kind of a paper you can wave around and call it a deal. Yeah, so that's something that I've been thinking about a lot. But then actually it was pretty interesting when I was writing that piece the other day. I sort of like revisited a little bit like other things that I've written throughout this like spring and like in the past 6 months. And I was quite happy to notice that like, for example, in March I had written sort of like a list of 4 steps that Europe needs to urgently take so that everything doesn't sort of like fall apart immediately, especially with Ukraine. Like if we still remember, that was a time when it really looked like Trump was potentially able to like force Ukraine into some kind of a ceasefire deal. And so the things that I suggested back then have all happened. So that was actually pretty reassuring to realize that my ambition level wasn't even that high, although it seemed like this that was potentially completely unrealistic. So basically, the things that I suggested was like that the EU or like Europe needs to get enough or like put enough money to the table for Ukraine so that Europe can credibly signal that we can keep Ukraine afloat, and we can fill the gap that is emerging as the US isn't committing any new aid to Ukraine. That happened. It didn't happen in the format that was initially suggested as sort of like a big EU fund, but in the end, it like European countries, and this was something I talked last time I was on the show. European countries had already by March like financially filled the gap. Obviously, there's still some capability gaps that Europe has a harder time to fill. But financially, Europe had filled that gap by April already. So it took a very like only a couple of months for Europe to do that, and the EU institutions played an important role there too. Then the second thing, or like steps 2 and 3 that I wrote about back in March, was that Europe first of all needs to get rid of all the inefficiencies and bureaucracy, sort of peacetime bureaucracy in the defense industrial base, because that's been a huge hurdle. Even in the 3.5 years of this full-scale war in Ukraine, unfortunately. And the EU has been working on that a lot, actually. There's been a number, like 4 or 5 different like new EU instruments that are addressing these issues, like the demand and supply, and like how to better coordinate both procurement and production in Europe. And the EU has also established new financial instruments for defense investment and production. So there's been a lot there, and these things were agreed on like very, very quickly. And that's actually, I mean, when you think about it, especially when any EU regulation is involved, like 6 months are really just like a blink of an eye. Like that's nothing. So the pace has been like quite fast. And then like one point that I also made was that like Europe needs to start really investing in the Ukrainian defense industry. And happily,
Right.
thanks to Denmark, this is being done. So the Danish model, like that Denmark came up with, that they just like give money, like they directly finance Ukrainian production. That's been now adopted on the EU level, and many countries are contributing to that. So yeah, so actually all of the things that I suggested back then are happening, and like like my glass remains half full. It's just that like it looks half empty to many people, and that's obviously also an issue.
So I want to ask you, only half tongue in cheek, how much of this can be attributed to the fact that Northern Flank Notes is widely read in Brussels and in Berlin, and
Oh, I'm
that,
happy to take all the credit for this. I'm sure that I've been pushing
and that half
everybody
of
to
Germany is
exceed their
glued to
abilities.
your Twitter and Blue Sky feed by
I honestly
way
think
of
though, like more seriously,
hate reading
I do
you,
think that
but they're
I'm not the only
secretly
one who is
going
pushing
back
like
and
this more positive
implementing
narrative, but it's just so important. And
a
actually,
lot of what
I'm
you
gonna send
say.
the link as well. It's just that like being sort of semi-blended by the sun, I do actually have to move to the shade, I
Whoops, I
think, so that
think
I can
Minna
actually
is
see anything on the
frozen.
screen, really.
I think my
But
my
anyways,
question is
I do think that
so
what we need much more
has
is
just
sort of like
shocked her
the
into
ability to imagine different futures. And a friend and
silence.
colleague of mine, Roderick Parks, who works
Minna, if
as a
you can
researcher
hear
at the NATO
me,
Defense Hub.
you should refresh, and probably oh, Minna is gone entirely. I'm sure she'll be back. So that question was half tongue in cheek, but I want to submit that it was only half tongue in cheek, because I do think uh, Minna is part of a larger argument that is taking place mostly. There's, I think, three key demographic groups that is driving this argument, which is number one, younger people. Um, Younger analysts are much more apt to be aggressive on the uh, defense Russia set of issues all over Europe. And number two, Eastern and Northern Europe. That is the Nordics and the Baltics and the um, the front line, or Poland. These groups are much more likely to be aggressive with respect to, one might say, clear-eyed, um, and they have been suddenly influential in the years since 2022, first driven by Russian behavior and then driven by American behavior. And the third issue is that this is the subject of active debate and conversation that is, because of the way Europe is structured, which is to say, every country has its own debate, and then there is a European debate layered on top of that, which is really un-American, by the way. I don't mean that in the sense of bad. I mean it in the sense of like profoundly different from the way debate takes place in the United States, where, you know, states just aren't as different from one another as, say, Belgium is from Bulgaria, right? And so you have these very culturally specific debates, and then you have this general pan-European debate, and this set of arguments, both within countries and across countries, is an active one, and people like Minna who are professionally spending their careers in large part making the case for this are actually winning, and uh, it's a very slow, very incremental. I mean, turning German and French foreign policy is that's a massive pair of battleships and aircraft carriers to turn, but um it's um uh a really uh it's a really substantial argument that is actually being engaged by and won by uh, an intellectual position, right? And policy is flowing ultimately, indirectly, from this argument that is taking place. And I do think, Minna is an exemplary part of this argument, um, both at the policy level. She refers to white papers and stuff for policymakers, but also at the public persuasion level. Not that half of Brussels is reading Northern Flank Notes, but some people in Brussels are reading Northern Flank Notes, and this argument is a big part of what the European challenge is right now. And so I am sure that had Minna not frozen, she would have said something self-effacing like, "Oh, of course not. This is a coincidence." And that is the correct answer in some sense, but also in another sense, an incorrect answer. Um, this is a policy shift that is taking place at a macro level as a result of an argument that is happening at the level of politicians, the level of elder statesmen, the level of the European Commission, the level of national governments, but also at the level of mass opinion and sentiment in a lot of different countries, and she is participating in that argument in a particularly interesting and constructive and substantive fashion. And so, while she is not here for me to embarrass her, let's just say that there was a reason why people like me and people like Thomas Ilves and people like uh, you know, Fabian Hoffman, and all found Minna's Twitter presence extremely compelling a few years ago. And the other thing I will say, which is that Minna was um, uh, has been engaged in this argument in multiple countries. When it sort of started, she was living in Germany, and a lot of her a lot of the argument was with Germans, who are, have a particular place in this argument that they come by honestly, but is, not always the most, um, uh, frankly, constructive place. I mean, if you want to think about where the rear guard action is, it's in Paris and in Berlin. I've just been singing your praises about a number of things, and it's good that you didn't hear it because it would have embarrassed you. Um,
Oh, I'm
uh,
glad.
uh, but so Minna is back. Um, and so then, then she went back to Finland for a while and participated in this argument there at a time when it was a very substantial and fateful argument because, the question was really whether, what Finland's relationship with NATO was going to be. And now she's doing it in in Stockholm. And so I just, this is a really, like, um, I don't know how Minna was going to answer my question about whether Northern Flank Notes is driving this whole thing. The question was sort of a joke, but there's a sense in which it is not a joke, and it's not really about Northern Flank Notes or Minna individually. It's about this argument and people like Minna, of whom she is an exemplary example. I don't know if you can be an exemplary example, who are overwhelmingly young, Eastern or Northern European. Not all, you got your Fabian Hoffmans who are, German, right? Um, and and are actually having this argument in public in a way that is really quite different from, what Europe was like 20 years ago when it was really a few Eastern Europeans and who were, making a case that the rest of Europe dismissed as warmongering. So there you go. I don't know how much of that you heard, Minna, but I had to do an impromptu monologue because you vanished.
Yeah,
And
sorry
so,
for like ditching you. Like I was hopeful that I had fixed my hotspot issues, but apparently I had not. So it was a good 10 minutes, but then the fun was over. So I had to run back inside, and now I'm like hopeful in a stable Wi-Fi.
and you're
Anyways,
visible. You're
I'm
not like
visible as well.
you're
I'm not
not
just
like
a
a
shadow.
Apollo vision in white.
Exactly. And now I can like much more easily send also the links that I promised. So did I already cut off before I answered your question about like what my contribution to this has been?
No, you
Because like
froze. You
okay,
froze as I was asking the question, uh,
okay.
and um, and so I answered my own question. But I suspect let's see if you answer it in the way that I think that I predicted you would answer it.
Yeah, so actually like I thought that I was still visible and audible, so I did answer it and I said that I'm of course very happy to take all the credit for like having pushed people to exceed their abilities. But honestly, I do think that there has been a huge issue with like unwarranted pessimism in Europe and about Europe, not only in Europe and among European analysts, but also like I read so many so pessimistic and even dismissive takes from American analysts about Europe. And I think that this is really problematic. Like I think there's like a number of issues about it. And one of them is, for example, that the EU, both in Europe and from the outside, gets often compared to unitary state actors like the US. And if you do that, you're gonna just like make a number of analytical mistakes because like Europe just isn't like the EU is not a federal state like the US is, and it in all likelihood will never be. So I'm also sometimes frustrated with this sort of like European habit to set ourselves like impossible standards that only sort of like then feel like we inevitably fail because like they are just like unrealistic. So I personally don't think that the EU will ever become a federal state, and I don't think that is necessary either. And we also have to sort of like start tolerating more this sort of multiplicity of voices and leadership, because like if anything in the past 3 years leadership has gotten more diffuse, not more unitary in Europe. But I personally don't think that it's a bad thing. I think it's much better sort of like not to always depend on the Franco-German tandem to like show us the way, because like very often when they don't agree, for example, then like the whole EU can get pretty sort of like blocked. And I think it's better that we have now a number of countries, all of the small, also the smaller ones, who have become much more proactive in taking initiative and like pushing the EU and Europe in generally into like certain directions. And it's really good to have the UK back, but they still have like, I feel like there's more at this point sort of like internal sort of like process of getting over certain things that are Brexit legacies in the UK. Like they also really struggle with like accepting the EU as a partner, and uh, because like obviously that was the whole sort of like core reason for the Brexit. But I mean, there's been a number of other European analysts as well who have written about this pessimism bias in Europe. For example, a Dutch journalist, Caroline de Gruyter, whose name I completely mispronounced. I'm so sorry. Just in case she ever hears this, I apologize. But
Nobody can pronounce Dutch names.
exactly.
It's just, I
um,
mean, impossible.
yeah, so she wrote something, and actually, I think I have a link here that I can send in the chat so that people can see what I'm talking about. She wrote like just before Trump took office that Europe's biggest problem is not Trump but pessimism, and that it's often like unwarranted, and there's so many metrics sort of like that actually suggest that Europe is doing fine, but somehow like we're unable to get those narratives together. And this is something that I've been sort of like really wondering about, like how come honestly like Trump is not a mess of our making, you know? We did not vote for him. Like he's also our problem, but one that we can't solve in Europe. Like we just have to find ways to deal with it. And the shame is sort of like not on us in Europe that Trump happened and for all the sort of like problems that he's causing. So I find it like fascinating how nevertheless in the narrative realm, like all of this, like everything that Trump does to essentially hurt American interests, like all of his policies so far have been detrimental to the US most and first and foremost. So it's fascinating to see how, nevertheless, the conclusion always is that somehow this all just proves that Europe is weak. And I'm like, okay, it often like so Europe has forced them like sort of as a part of the strategy of placating Trump in order to sort of like distract him from like doing worse damage. Sure, like we have accepted a number of times like the optics of weakness, but the substance is different, like just as we talked about like in the very beginning. And I can now finally also send the link to my piece from today on the European correspondent, which I promised like 20 minutes ago. So here it comes. And then actually like all this brings me to what I would have started talking about had I not been cut off. um, so a friend and colleague of mine, Roderick Parks, just published a report last week at the NATO Defense College, where he extensively looks into this question of willingness to defend and sort of like societal resilience, and how elite pessimism about the societies and elite misunderstanding of how society works and reacts to crisis can create a self-fulfilling prophecy that itself then sort of like creates this vicious cycle of eroding societal resilience and resolve especially. And so I talked with him about this topic a number of times over the course of the spring, and like when he was writing this, and I think he did a really good job with the report. So I'm going to send a link to that as well. It's a very long report, but it also includes like a fun kind of questionnaire where you can test which type you are personally. Are you a strategist, a planner, or an influencer? And Roderick's point is that sort of what has gone missing in like Western strategic thinking is the part of imagination. That we do like a lot of strategy, we do a lot of planning, but a lot of it sort of like has this inherent pessimism bias, and we are not very good at like imagining different kinds of futures and what is possible. And I think that that's sort of been missing in especially the European discourse and in the discourse about Europe. Like, for example, when we build up European military power, it's not going to look like American military power, because like America, and this is one of the main issues, for example, when we talk in Europe about like all the strategic enablers that the US has provided European allies, and that we need to sort of like replace in one way or another. Because the whole point is that we cannot in Europe start trying to replace these capabilities. It's a fool's errand. Because whatever kind of a posture the US has, it's a global one, and US capabilities are built with this in mind, that the US needs to be able to project power globally. And I don't think that Europe will ever become like a global military power in that sense. Or like, I have a very hard time seeing this happening, like for so many structural and motivational reasons. I think that the European military power will be very much more sort of like regionally focused and defensive in nature. So we need to like imagine a completely different way of doing things if we are to do this without the US. And sometimes we just look at like, okay, the US has provided all of these things, they cost this much money and the lead time is this long and we will never be able to do this. And then we just like fixate on like our inability to do what the US has been doing, instead of thinking about what is like a different way of doing things that we very well can succeed at. So yeah, that's been sort of like a lot on my mind this week, sort of this unwarranted sort of like deep pessimism that leads to doomerism and even sort of a defeatism that doesn't give us any credit at all to even try. And like when you get to the point that you constantly communicate to the public that like we're gonna fail anyways, like for sure that has a really demoralizing effect. And that's part of like why I've been doing what I've been doing. Sort of like I just decided more or less, it was a like a deliberate decision in the beginning of the year that I will just be optimistic, because like when you look at any like
Optimistic and
material,
demanding.
yeah, both, like you can demand actually like optimism, like or in an optimistic way you can demand the bar to be high but still realistic. So that like you look at some like material conditions and you're like, okay, Europe has money, Europe has technical know-how, Europe has even the industrial base. If we just like make it less inefficient, like there's no material reason why we shouldn't, like why we should fail at like whatever needs to be done. So like when you point out those things, like and then like you also sort of like as an analyst and also as sort of like an audience, then you create sort of like also not only political like demand for political decisions, but also space for those political decisions. When you sort of like communicate that to political leadership, that you understand like what is possible and that this is what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's a really important point, and I think um there's a domestic analog to it in the United States. So I wrote my column yesterday about how my vision of a mass non-cooperation with what I call the situation. Um, uh, I've been struggling to come up with a thing we can all do to not cooperate that is effective and distributable and participatory. In other words, something analogous to everybody refusing to pay their taxes, which is unrealistic for a number of reasons. Um, uh, and along the way, I tried to identify what are the forms of non-cooperation that are taking place. And they're actually pretty impressive, and they range from, bunch of Democrats picking up and leaving Texas and going to Illinois to deny a quorum uh, to the Texas legislature, to you know, a whole bunch of people on their own initiative with very little coordination, as best as I can tell, taking video of ICE raids and sharing it with media, sharing it publicly, to some sprite of mischief who may have been inspired by an earlier non-cooperation column of mine, managing to interrupt a speech by Jim Jordan with a loudspeaker playing Send in the Clowns. Um, and, there's a million examples of these, but we don't think of them as successes because the overall environment is so negative. And wanna I wanna have a more uh, Ålander-esque European attitude toward that, which is, wait a minute, we should demand a lot of ourselves here, but we should also recognize what we're doing. And, we're pushing up against a massive, massive power base, which is the US federal executive branch. And you're not going to make all the progress all at once. And don't sell short initiatives that don't accomplish everything. So whoever it was, that sprite of mischief who managed to, uh, you know, play that music on top of a Jim Jordan speech, um, kudos. That's the kind of thing everybody should be thinking about ways to do. I'm still looking for the occasion to imitate those trans kids in England who released thousands of crickets into an anti-trans conference and got the thing shut down through release of insects. You don't have to take down the entire structure in order for things to be good. And you're talking about a completely different thing, which is policy change. But I think the same mood should apply, which is, hey, you demand a lot of yourself, but you also don't deny the things that, turning 5 million people out in the streets in the United States, in every city in the country, is no small thing. And so I actually think the mood that you're describing is an important one and not confined merely to the environment in which you're describing it.
Yeah, I think that like for any kind of transformative action to happen, a great number of people first have to, first of all, like know what's possible, like perfectly realistically, and then believe that it's also feasible. And I think that it's like a really sort of valuable contribution to sort of highlight these two things in any given context where you need to sort of like get people to understand why something's important and why we should sort of like have also faith in ourselves. So I think it's a perfect analogy in a way what's happening in the US as well.
Yes, and I would also say there's another important analogy to it, which is um, that in both cases, we're out of the habit. Um, and Europe is out of the habit of thinking about how to do defense. And by the way, the last time it was in the habit of thinking about how to do military stuff, the the habit always contained an element of offense, that it does not, you know, it was mostly Europe on Europe stuff rather than, how, could Germany invade France, right? Could France invade Russia, right? There's like Europeans um, uh, don't think about, haven't historically thought about military affairs in terms of collective self-defense against uh, a foreign, or in this case, single monolithic Eastern European bloc. And by the way, when they have thought about that, they've thought about it purely under the US umbrella. And similarly, we haven't had to think about, in a serious way, how do you prevent the US executive branch from becoming an authoritarian thing? So we're sort of out of there's a similar out of practice quality to this. I do want to point out for everybody, I would be remiss if I didn't point this out, um, that let me just show you this. For those who don't want to deal with actual crickets, um, uh, I may have bought several of these electronic crickets, like maybe a whole lot of them, and have been thinking about where would be a good place to install them, just in the spirit of mischief around town. I think if you did it carefully, they would be very difficult to find, and uh, might be more effective than actual crickets, at least for certain deployments. Anyway, there's always, by the way, I don't know of any laws that prohibit leaving accidentally, say, a dozen electronic cricket noisemakers in, say, a uh, um, enclosed location of private property. They're not, recording devices. They're not, they're really, being annoying is generally not illegal. And so I really urge people to think about where would be a good place to leave an annoying cricket noisemaker, or 1,000 live crickets. They're both very doable. Crickets are inexpensive. $15 will buy you 1,000 of them. You can feed them to reptiles. You can also just forget that you left them in say the auditorium of a local whatever. Just saying. So, Minna, I have a question, two questions for you about the European correspondent, which we should also leave a link to. Um, the first is, how many correspondents are there around Europe, and how many of them, in your dual capacity as the defense editor there and a co-host of Dogshirt TV, how many of them want to come on Dogshirt TV some European afternoon and have a conversation about their work?
That is like such an awesome dual use idea. Honestly, I'm gonna immediately float this in our group chats. I have to admit that like don't yet have a full overview, because we have sort of like more regular correspondence, and then basically like anybody can pitch a story for us. So any like freelance journalist who is based in Europe can sort of like pitch to us through our website, which I did, by the way, link to in the chat. So I think that we should have plenty of correspondents who probably will be happy to join the show. So I'm gonna start hopefully providing a stream of colleagues to the show to discuss like their respective countries. That would be awesome, so that we get like a much wider perspective from Europe with different topics. So we'll be happy, really happy to do that. And by the way, Ben, I have a slightly funnier topic for the last 10 minutes that has to do with my hat.
Excellent.
I was
There have
wearing
been
this for a
questions
reason.
about the hat.
Yeah, I was wearing this for a reason. So the character here is from the Movements. It's called Stinky. And it's sort of like a petty criminal that has here stolen like a lot of booze in this particular picture, but it also like just does little sabotage actions and other things, and it's a generally bad influence sort of in the moving world. And there was this story from, so it's the 80th anniversary of the creation of the movements this year, and there was a like anniversary exhibition in a Brooklyn library, and they removed this character from the exhibition because one of the funders of the exhibition expressed concerns that this could be like perceived as a racist character. And
Because he's black, or
I mean, it's like a dust ball.
yeah,
It's not a
it's
human character.
right.
And I was like the whole sort of like moving characters Inc. and like everybody was just like, what? Like, how does somebody perceive Stinky as a racist character? Because it's literally just like this kind of dust ball kind of thing.
Well,
So
important Moomin culture question. Lior, who is in Jerusalem, says he grew up on them. I grew up on them too, and it turns out there are many more Moomin books than I was aware of as a small child. I knew of 4 or 5 of them, but um, so is Moomin, is it primarily an export, or are Finns obsessed with them as well?
So the movements are like such a core thing for the Finnish culture and identity, and it's sort of like a horoscope like thing. Sort of that depending on what's your favorite character, that tells a lot about you. People immediately know like what kind of a person you are if you say that this one is my favorite character, and people are like, oh, like she or he is such an XYZ character. People just also casually wear like Moomin print stuff. Everybody has the Moomin mugs at home. I have had some. Here's, for example, one Moomin mug where the Moomin father is sitting in a tree and reading Agatha Christie. So everybody, literally every Finnish household has these mugs. And there's a lot of the original books that are actually not children's books. They are sort of like more for also grown-up audience that Tove Jansson, the creator of the Movements, wrote. And then there's also really nice comics. They've all been translated into English as well. So those are really good. I really like them. And then there's of course this like sort of legendary Moomin anime from the late 80s that every like Finnish kid, including myself, grew up with in the 90s watching. And basically babysitting in Finland used to be just like putting on the Moomins and then every once in a while like checking on the kids that they're not doing anything else except watching. And everybody has seen all of these episodes. So that's like super huge part of like Finnish culture, definitely. So we have like managed to export it to quite a number of other countries, especially the other Nordic countries. So they're very present also like in Sweden and in Norway. But interestingly enough, in Western Germany back in the Cold War, they were considered too progressive in their sort of family values. I mean, there were some questionable things that the Movements did in the stories. For example, living under a boat on the Riviera, sending a box of curse words that were sort of like funny little characters to an aunt they didn't like, and this kind of other controversial moves that they made that were considered too much for the conservative Western German family values. So they weren't shown for a
Not to
very long
mention
time.
that there's
Yeah.
a real non-binary character in the Moomin world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's very sort of like very liberal and progressive in many ways. Um,
it's not clear to me that it did that intentionally as a values statement so much as effortlessly. Um, it's just a fun-loving family that kind of doesn't judge each other. But there's one of the things that I think makes it work so well is that it actually isn't particularly preaching values. It's just it's not especially didactic. Um, it just is.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it has some background actually in that the creator Tove Jansson, she was herself, I think, bisexual, but like her longtime partner was female, for example, and yeah, so she was also Swedish speaking Finn, so the originals are actually in Swedish, not in Finnish. And the origin of the character of the Moomin, by the way, don't ever call them hippos. They are not hippos. They are Moomins.
They're
Don't make
moments.
this mistake. This is going to
Yeah.
upset every Finn if you call them hippos. But anyway, so she like drew this character once when she was very upset at her brother or something and wanted to just like draw something very ugly. So that's like the origin story of the Moomins, and then they became this whole sort of like national lore kind of thing.
And
So
do they
yeah.
have origins in any kind of Finnish mythology, or they're Moomins, but there are non-Moomin characters. There's a hobgoblin. There's all these beasts that you kind of, as a foreigner, have a sense must have some origin foot in Finnish folk culture or not, or are they just like made up in the 60s and 70s?
I think Tove Jansson just made most of it up herself. I'm at least not aware of like any deeper connection to some like folklore stuff, but I'm sure that there's a number of PhDs written about this topic, so I can look it up. Especially now in the anniversary year, there's been like so much new stuff being published and so on. So yeah, probably a couple of PhDs as well.
I also always liked about them as a child that, unlike Finns, they hibernate. Um, and there's always this alternative vision of how to deal with a long, cold winter that, they just go to sleep and wake up in the spring. And one of my favorite of the books is when one of them can't sleep and wakes up and learns about what's going on while his family hibernates.
Yeah, it was a shocking experience for the Moomin troll to wake up at the wrong time. But then, and then he actually encountered in the winter world this like ski enthusiast who is like a very real character. We all know that guy. Probably most of us had him as a PE teacher at some point in school. So yeah, there's like in that sense, there's of course like a lot of cultural references to Finnish life.
Interesting. So you're going to defend Stinky as not a racist. He's just a ball of dust and a mischief maker, but not he's not a reference to any racial group. I'm going to go with that because I have
Yes.
no desire to no desire whatsoever to complicate any child or adult's love of these books. So free Stinky hashtag. I think it's we've got to create a campaign, um, and I think we're gonna, for those of you who've never spent time with the Moomin Troll books, please do, and do it actually with a child. I think the ideal age is like 7 or 8, um, and sit down with a Moomin Troll book. The original one, Finn Family Moomin Troll, is quite wonderful. Sit down with a Moomin Troll book and read it to a child, and you will have a great time, and so will the child. We are going to leave it there. Minna, who's I think frozen again, you have your assignment. And to recruit all your new colleagues to come join the show sometime. Come back soon yourself, and folks, we're going to be back tomorrow, and I don't know what's going to happen, but it's going to be awesome. Maybe there will be a Moomin Troll.